Welcome to Cheat Confessions. Let's get started with today's story. For months she had been slowly poisoning everything I believed about my life. My marriage, my future, myself. And she did it so skillfully that I almost let her finish. But the night I sat in that parking garage in the rain and watched her walk out of that hotel laughing with another man, something inside me stopped grieving and started planning. And when the plan was finally complete, I executed it in the one place she had never once considered I would be capable of. My name is Marcus Davies. I'm 39 years old. I work in financial analysis for a mid-sized firm in downtown Chicago. For 6 years I was married to Jessica. Smart, beautiful, the kind of woman who commanded every room she entered. We had built what looked, from every exterior angle, like a genuinely good life. A brownstone in Lincoln Park. A future we had discussed in concrete terms. Plans that had names and timelines attached to them. Then something changed. Not suddenly, gradually, the way a foundation settles before the structure above it begins to show the strain. Jessica, who had once shared every detail of her day, became a vault. Her phone, once left carelessly on the kitchen counter while she made coffee, was now permanently in her hand, screen down, passcode changed. She started working late, citing a demanding new project at her marketing firm. Then I found the receipts, folded into the pocket of her coat when I was going to take it to the dry cleaner. Dinners at Gibson's on Rush Street, the place we only went for anniversaries, paid on a credit card I had never seen before. The dates matched her late nights at the office. The cold weight of that settled in my gut and stayed there. I heard fragments of phone calls she took in the hallway, her voice dropping to a low, private register before she heard my footsteps and snapped the call shut. Just her mother, she'd say, not quite meeting my eyes. When I tried to talk to her about the distance growing between us, she pivoted immediately. Called me paranoid. Said I was suffocating her. Asked didn't I trust her, with a look that made the question feel like an accusation. Her manipulation was precise. And for a while, I almost believed her. I was losing myself inside the doubt she was manufacturing for me. The man in the mirror looked hollowed out. Then came the Thursday that changed everything. She told me she was at a conference in Rosemont. I had a feeling it wasn't true, but I couldn't name exactly why until I called her office to send flowers, and her assistant Chloe sounded genuinely confused. Jessica took the day off, Mr. Davies. I drove without a clear plan. Just the certainty pulling me toward the truth I had been avoiding for months. I ended up in the parking garage of the Swiss Hotel overlooking the Chicago River. And there it was. Her pearl-white Lexus parked beside a black Porsche I recognized immediately. It belonged to David Thorne, a real estate developer she had met at a charity gala several months earlier. I had disliked him on sight without being able to fully articulate why. He had the particular stillness of someone accustomed to taking whatever he wanted. I sat in my car for 3 hours, rain blurring the windshield, knuckles white against the steering wheel. When they finally emerged from the elevator lobby, laughing, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back like he owned the space she occupied, something inside me completed a transition that had been building for months. The grief was gone. In its place was something colder and considerably more useful. A calm, clear, methodical certainty about what needed to happen next. I didn't confront them. I didn't get out of the car. I just watched them walk to their vehicles, let them drive away, and then I sat alone in the rain for another few minutes understanding exactly what I was going to do. Revenge would not be a fiery explosion. It would be a slow, deliberate, thoroughly documented demolition. The kind that could not be undone or explained away or reframed into something manageable. I drove home, sat at the kitchen table, and started making a list. The private investigator worked out of a small office in the West Loop. He had the look of someone who had spent decades in law enforcement and left with more information about human nature than he had ever wanted. He was expensive. He was worth every dollar. Over the following weeks, he gave me everything. Photographs of Jessica and David in a dimly lit booth at a restaurant they apparently believed was discreet enough. Hotel check-in records, timestamps, and audio, a recording device placed in David's car that captured conversations I forced myself to listen to in their entirety, letting every word do what it needed to do. What I heard on those recordings completed my education. Jessica referred to me with a particular contempt of someone who had long since stopped believing I was capable of seeing through her. She called me her sweet, pathetic little project. David laughed and called me the golden retriever. They spoke about their arrangement with the easy confidence of people who believed they were completely invisible. I listened to all of it without flinching. Every word clarified the next step. I met with the divorce attorney my investigator recommended, a woman with a reputation in Chicago legal circles that had been built on cases exactly like this one. She reviewed the evidence with the efficient precision of someone who had processed many variations of this particular human disaster and found it both familiar and useful. She walked me through the prenuptial agreement Jessica and I had signed before the wedding. The infidelity clause was Jessica's own addition, her idea, her language, her insisted upon protection. She had joked at the time that it was for my benefit. The attorney looked at me over her reading glasses and said simply, "She handed you everything you need." We drafted the divorce petition, ironclad, citing every piece of evidence with legal precision. Then I began designing the final act. I sent the photograph on a Tuesday evening. I had found the image anonymously, a positive pregnancy test, and sent it to my own phone from an untraceable number. Then I walked into the kitchen where Jessica was sitting and held up the screen without explanation, watching her face. Her expression shifted immediately into something that looked, from a distance, like relief and joy. Tears welled in her eyes. She began speaking about the miracle they had been waiting for, about everything they had been through with fertility treatments, about finally getting what they deserved. She thought the test was hers. She didn't know I had sent it. She didn't know it was a test of a different kind entirely. She didn't know I had already had a fertility analysis conducted using a water bottle she had left in my car, a routine procedure that had nothing to do with pregnancy and everything to do with establishing a complete and documented picture of our situation. The results were clinically clear. Due to a medical condition she had apparently never disclosed to me, natural conception was effectively impossible for her. I let her cry over the photograph she thought was hers. I said very little. I filed the moment away with everything else I had been filing for months. The trap required a stage. And her parents' 40th anniversary party at the Drake Hotel was the perfect one. A room full of family, friends, her father's business associates, and everyone whose opinion had ever mattered to anyone in her world. I confirmed my attendance. I arranged for 2 process servers to be present. I contacted David's wife quietly and directly, sharing a portion of what I had discovered, enough that she made the decision to attend the party herself, which she was already invited to through mutual social connections. Then I waited. The ballroom at the Drake was exactly what it always was, a monument to the kind of family that valued the performance of success and happiness above almost everything else. Flowers, champagne, the warm light of a room full of people who believed they were celebrating something genuine. Jessica was radiant that evening, her hand on my arm, her smile directed at me with the practiced warmth of someone who had long since learned to separate her interior life from its outward presentation. I had been studying that smile for months. I knew it well enough to see it for exactly what it was. The toasts began. Family members stood and spoke. Laughter moved through the room at appropriate moments. Her father accepted compliments on 40 years of marriage with the dignity of a man who had built his reputation on being someone people could trust. When I stood, glass in hand, the room settled naturally. I was the son-in-law. I was expected to be gracious. I began by talking about love, about trust, about the things that hold a life together when everything else shifts. Jessica was still smiling beside me, her hand warm on my arm. Then my tone changed. I spoke about betrayal, about the photograph I had shown Jessica weeks earlier, the positive pregnancy test I had held up in our kitchen while she cried. I saw the flicker of confusion begin in her eyes as she tried to connect the threads. "The thing is," I said, and my voice was carrying clearly through the silent room now, "that test didn't belong to Jessica." I reached into my jacket pocket and produced the fertility analysis. I described its findings clearly and without embellishment. The room was completely still. Then I told them about David Thorne. I told them David's wife was present that evening, and I watched the room find her, standing near the edge of the crowd with an expression that had moved, over the previous several seconds, from confusion to the particular horror of someone who is understanding something they cannot ununderstand. I told them what I had learned from my investigator about David's financial arrangements, how he had been funding his double life by redirecting funds from his own company, a company his wife's father had founded and still partially owned. The silence in that room had physical weight. David, standing near the bar with a drink in his hand, had gone completely pale. His wife was staring at him with an expression I will not soon forget. I looked at Jessica. Her face had come apart entirely. The tears running down her cheeks were not for a miracle finally arriving. They were for a life she was watching dissolve in real time in front of every person who had ever mattered to her. A server approached Jessica with a manila envelope. Another approached David with an identical one. Divorce papers and a civil suit. Served publicly in a room full of witnesses. Her father, a man who had spent 40 years building a reputation on integrity and discretion, turned to look at his daughter with an expression that contained nothing resembling forgiveness or rescue. I placed my wedding ring on the table in front of me. Then I turned and walked out of the ballroom without looking back at any of them. The legal proceedings moved with the momentum that thorough preparation produces. The prenuptial infidelity clause she had insisted on, her own language, her own protection, held exactly as my attorney had said it would. The financial arrangements shifted accordingly. The civil proceedings related to David's conduct became their own separate matter, one that involved attorneys and investigators who had nothing to do with me and everything to do with what he had been doing with other people's money. I did not follow what happened to Jessica and David closely. I heard fragments through mutual connections over the following months, that David's wife had filed immediately, that the financial investigation had reached conclusions his attorneys were struggling to manage, that Jessica had left the marketing firm and relocated. I did not seek out those details. They were not mine to manage anymore. What I found in the weeks after the divorce was something I hadn't expected. Not relief exactly, but a kind of structural clarity. The particular sensation of a weight being removed that you had grown so accustomed to carrying you had forgotten it was there. For months I had been operating under the accumulated pressure of suspicion and grief and the specific exhaustion of loving someone who was using that love as cover for a completely separate life. I had been hollowing out slowly from the inside while performing normalcy on the outside, showing up to work, coming home, making the kind of ordinary conversation that keeps a household functioning while something underneath it all was rotting. That was gone now. The apartment was quiet. Genuinely, uncomplicated quiet. I did not feel triumphant. I want to be honest about that. What I had done in that ballroom had been precise, and it had been deserved. But standing in the aftermath of it, I felt primarily the vast hollow absence of something I had spent 6 years building. The victory, such as it was, existed alongside a grief that had nothing to do with Jessica specifically, and everything to do with the version of the future I had believed in until the evidence made believing impossible. There is something specific about the kind of betrayal that operates in plain sight, that uses your trust, your patience, your fundamental willingness to believe the best about someone you love, as its primary tool. It doesn't just damage what you know. It damages what you think you know. It rewrites the past in a way that leaves you questioning your own perception of years that you had believed you understood. Every memory becomes suspect. Every moment of genuine happiness gets contaminated by the retroactive knowledge that the person sharing it was simultaneously building something designed to replace it. That is the part that takes the longest to work through. Not the betrayal itself, not the photographs or the hotel records or the audio recordings or the public exposure. Those things hurt in a way that is at least legible, at least connected to something real and present. The harder work is the internal one, the slow reconstruction of your own reliability as a witness to your own life. Learning to trust what you see rather than automatically reaching for the most generous interpretation of evidence that should have been legible far earlier than it was. I had let her convince me I was paranoid, that my instincts were a character flaw, that the correct response to noticing things that didn't add up was to apologize for noticing them. That is what I carry from this. Not the specific details of the ending, not the moment in the ballroom or the expression on her face when the envelope arrived or the sound the room made when everything became clear. Those details will fade with time the way all specific memories do. What stays is the lesson underneath them. That clarity, real, honest, documented clarity about what is actually happening rather than what you wish were happening, is not paranoia. It is not cruelty. It is not a betrayal of love. It is simply the decision to see. I moved out of the Lincoln Park brownstone, took a smaller place closer to the lake, started working longer hours for a while, which helped, and then gradually less, which helped more. I went back to habits I had quietly abandoned, early mornings, The kind of cooking that requires actual attention. Friendships I had let thin out because a marriage that was performing intimacy while delivering distance doesn't leave much room for genuine connection outside it. The city felt different after the divorce. Chicago in winter has a particular quality. The cold coming off the lake, the specific gray of the sky on days when the light never quite arrives. I had spent several winters treating that quality as oppressive. Somewhere in the months after everything ended, I started finding it honest instead. The cold didn't pretend to be anything other than cold. There was something restful in that. I am not done grieving the version of the future I thought I was building. I don't think grief works on a schedule clean enough to be done with it at any particular point. But I am clear, genuinely, thoroughly, without reservation clear, about what I saw, about what I did in response to it, about who I am on the other side of it. Some things cannot be rebuilt once they have been fundamentally compromised. Others, the ones worth having, can only be built from honest ground. I am starting there. Thank you for watching.